Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. You're listening to a new Redefining Security podcast. Have you ever thought that we are selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power, now more than ever. HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
Asgardio by WSO2 is a developer-focused identity and access management solution. Offered as Identity as a Service, or IDaaS, Asgardio by WSO2 creates seamless login experiences to your apps in minutes.
And look at that, here we are. We are live on Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin. You're very welcome to join us today. And it's been a few weeks. I've been creative with the scheduling of this episode, and I appreciate my guests for being flexible as we come together here on this Monday morning / afternoon, if you're West or East Coast, depending. And I'm thrilled to have Kristy Westphal on and Giora Engel. Thank you for being part of the show today.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
And the topic for those who are listening and watching is application security, and I have a slice of API security in there as well. As we were kind of discussing before we kicked into live mode here, there's been a lot of great work. We can point to OWASP and a bunch of organizations doing a lot of good work around securing the web application and applications in general, typically through an interface like the web. And we're seeing a lot more of applications kind of connecting through APIs as well, where they don't necessarily have an interface to see what's happening, or for users to, or bad actors, I should say, to exploit. So we're going to spend a lot of time general AppSec, kind of looking at the engineering process and how security teams get involved with that, and how security operations and security programs in general can help ensure that we're building applications that are secure. Before we do that, brief word from each guest, just so folks know who they're hearing from today. And Kristy, I'm going to start with you, what you're up to, what your role is, and maybe a word or two on why this topic is important.
Ooh, I could go on for hours. I'm kidding. I'm Kristy Westphal. I'm currently the Vice President of Security Operations at Health Equity. So I own all of incident response, and that's across fraud, cyber, data protection, and insider threat. And I think this topic is so complicated, but we've got to figure it out, right? So from my team's perspective, the traditional cyber response, we deal with the endpoints, we deal with network traffic, we deal with the traditional stuff. But then we've got this thing on the other side called applications that all our customers and our internal customers use as well. And we tend to not mix too much. And that's a problem, right? Because when something breaks, guess who has to respond? Or when it breaks because of a security reason, it's the security operations team. And so we've got this skill gap going on of how do we best do this? And we need to be better about being on the front end. So I'm really excited to kind of unpack some of these ideas today and see how we can come together as a community and figure this out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Kristy. And you can talk as long as you want. It's an open forum here. Giora.
Yeah, so I'm Giora Engel. I'm co-founder and CEO at Neosec, and for me, it was actually great to hear your perspective, Kristy, because for me, I'm a second-time cybersecurity entrepreneur. The first iteration was exactly on inventing XDR and solving these problems on the endpoint and network side. And Neosec is really all about API security, and what we've seen is that most security teams already have a handle on securing the enterprise, but these applications and APIs grow so fast these days, and they're much deeper into the business. So we're trying to take the same approach of visibility, detection, and response, and apply it to the API and application side.
So this can be such a wide topic. Let's put a little frame on it, and I'm going to ask Kristy to help with that, because we can talk about applications being developed by an organization to present to their customers so they can buy things and use the services and whatnot. Then there are apps built for the internal teams, and then there's a lot of off-the-shelf stuff that may just get deployed off the shelf and perhaps maybe even tweaked and tuned. And then, as we briefly discussed, there's this whole world of APIs where you're connecting things like Slacks to Jiras to GitHubs to all this stuff where things just connect, right? And things happen magically because of that. So I'm curious, your view of that world or those worlds, and are there other things maybe that I'm not even touching on you have to care about? Because there's engineering, and then there's operations, and there's management and response. Your thoughts on that first off.
So my first thought is going way back, long before we had cloud. It's with applications. It's always the instrumentation, right? It's the telemetry into those apps. Now we are much better at on that just plain operation side, monitoring those apps for health and uptime and all that stuff. It's the trying to get into those applications and understand what they do and how to best monitor and respond to them that we always have the problem. So then you start layering on top of that all of the other complications that you just mentioned, Sean, and it gets muddy really, really fast. But if you really boil that down, it's all about people understanding how things work and understanding where they broke. And I use broke a lot. It's broken by an attacker. It's broken by a user that just is trying to use it. It can be either way, but it's all about analysis. So to start, I wish I had a good answer for this, but the best I can come up with is you've got to understand your ecosystem. And the only way to do that is to have all these groups on board with each other, right? Because our security folks want to work with our developers, and I'm not just using my organization, but in general. But the developers have their mission. They have timeframes, they have deadlines, they got to make deliverables to get things done, and they don't want to all this security stuff. So we got to understand the ecosystem. We've got to communicate, and we as security folks who want to help do this better, we have to make it easier for the development community to do this. And there's a balance. I think we can unpack this a little bit of tools that work and tools that just don't work, and processes that don't work to do that. And somewhere in between, there's a solution. So that was a long answer, but here you go.
And maybe, Giora, if you have some thoughts on this, I'm wondering, your experience, do organizations, maybe Chris to have more thoughts on this as well, do organizations separate applications from procured versus developed? Do they get treated differently?
Yeah. I think that is one maybe new differentiation that organizations make. I think the security used to be very focused on IT. And on the kind of the CIO side of bringing all sorts of solutions and operating them and securing them. But today, most organizations, naturally new organizations, but also more traditional fields like healthcare and financial services, it's all about innovation and writing your own code to achieve, some new business goals and create new products and new offerings to your customers and partners. And I think there's a huge difference between applications that you develop internally and between applications that you buy from other vendors. I think from a security perspective, of course, both of them need to be secured, but the tools to secure them are very, very different, because when you develop your own application, you have a whole development process. You can influence the actual process from the beginning. And of course, you're responsible for operating the solution and understanding how it's used. Well, if you use an external solution, it's typically a SaaS solution. And then you only have control over the configuration and maybe some, some checks that you can do on the vendor, but it's very indirect. So I think the process is very, very different between the two.
So Kristy, where should we focus? Should we look at the homegrown stuff? Maybe set aside the procured apps for the moment.
Yeah, that's a whole other hour,
right.
At least. I think maybe that's probably the easier one to unpack, because as Giora mentioned, there's your IT, your traditional IT, and then there's maybe your CTO or your application stack, and they're usually not in the same organization. And I think ultimately we all have the same goal. The organization needs to make money, and we need to be able to deliver those apps. But I think we have hopefully better control over the internal folks to be able to bridge those gaps.
So let's get into some of the operational aspects of this, because you mentioned a couple teams already, and you mentioned that we want to share, or we share the same objectives, maybe same goals, maybe our MBOs look different, and maybe that's something we can touch on. But how do we? And I don't know, having built a gazillion products in my life, I know the better you do planning up front to the left, the easier it is for you moving through, and you're a little more resilient as you move to the right. I think everybody recognizes that, but how do we actually achieve that? How do we get security engineering into the engineering team, and security operations into the IT ops and DevOps teams? And so I don't know, Kristy, how do you bridge that initial gap? Is it at the architect time, or where is it?
Yeah, I've seen it done so many different ways, and it is a struggle no matter which way you do it, right? So I feel like if I take a step back, which I've been trying to do for this whole conversation, and get out of my just security operations vision, I think if you take a step back and you try something small, right? We try to boil the ocean when we try to implement some new security process. And I'll take architectural security patterns, for example. So if you're developing your application, here's all the things you need to test for, whether it's OWASP top 10 or whatever it is. Or I think number one, you need to kind of start small and come up with a successful example. Hey, we did this brand new build for this brand new thing. We did it this way. And look at that. There's no defects. There's no security vulnerabilities in this first deployment. If you can get that far, I think that's an accomplishment. And then you use that to kind of say, look, this worked, because then you start winning over other areas within those teams, because even within the development silos, there are more silos, and it's hard to get all of them to want to cooperate on the same page. So I don't know if there's any best way to do it, but that's my thinking, is start small.
Yeah, I love that. Quick wins is what I used to call them when I was building stuff. And I'm wondering, because you mentioned silos, and now we're attaching another silo to the silos. And I don't know if from your experience connecting with folks, are there particular parts of the engineering organization that are more apt to be a partner or a champion? I'm thinking QA, but I don't know. What do you think?
So interestingly, the more you build applications and APIs, you realize that security is typically not a gate anymore. I think in let's say in healthy organizations, it's considered an enabler, to accelerate your digital transformation and so on, because you're practically opening more and more to the outside. And if you do it right, it can actually really help your business. And of course, if you do it wrong, it also adds a lot of risks. But in a sense, you can't really avoid that need to to open yourself to the outside. That's the core business in the end of the day. So I think what we saw is that you can't think about it as a gate anymore. And the developers actually they have the same challenge in a sense. I mean, they don't have the complete visibility over everything. I mean, individual developers maybe see their own code, but as a development organization, you don't necessarily know everything and all the APIs and all the applications that are deployed. So that visibility gap is typically a problem of both sides, both security and developers. And if they work together, they can actually achieve much better results on that can address both the DevOps and operational aspects of it, as well as security.
And Kristy, I'm going to go to the MBOs, because I'm just wondering, I don't know if you have any experience in this or not, but just how we define success for an individual on a team in relation to the rest of the organization. Now, this doesn't have to be AppSec specific, right? This can be just general security. So maybe there are some things we can draw upon there, even to say, we've been able to make this work in this way on a broader picture. Here's a great way to apply it specifically to application security.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point. If we continue to support those silos by making sure everybody has their own goals and then none of them directly tie up to the overall strategy of the organization, you're going to get the same thing you had yesterday, right? So you got to try something, and I think that's achievable by being real specific on what everybody in the team, what their role is, and then I think if you set the team goals, like if your team doesn't achieve X, Y, and Z, including security and good quality code and functioning code and all that stuff, you all fail, right? That's your goal, and you guys have to figure it out. And then you can also keep that individual because they'll want to have some of their own goals. You set those too. You have a balance without overwhelming them. But I think it all comes back to what's the business strategy. And if you're all, and I see this a lot still within technical teams in general, if you're all setting, and your leaders aren't setting an overall strategy, and each group is setting their own goals for each year, because you have to set them, it's not going to work. So I really like the idea of shared goals as well.
Yeah, and the language, and Giora, maybe you have some thoughts on this just from building some products yourself, obviously. I don't know, when I was a program manager working with quality assurance and the build process team and the engineering team and the architecture team, we defined the program in a way where we purposely supported each other. We got into the user stories and crossed over into other areas and really helped kind of build some momentum behind what we were trying to accomplish. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, I don't know, is it stand-up meetings or agile milestone assessment? I don't know how and where do we have some of those discussions where we say we did a good job together, right? And that's what that looks like.
So naturally, we ourselves have develop applications and APIs as a SaaS company, and I think we have the same challenges like other companies, right? Because we have the developers are always pushed to add more capabilities from the customers and from the business and so on, and naturally everything needs to be delivered in the right way and tested and secured and everything. I think what we realized in building this company and also previously is that for many companies building SaaS components, and by the way, SaaS is practically, it doesn't have to be a SaaS product. Even if you're exposing applications and APIs to another partner, it's some kind of SaaS because you host it on your side, and they use your system. I think in modern teams and modern development paradigms, it's more of a continuous operation. It's not just one feature that you work on and you plan for a while, and then it takes a whole process. Instead, it's smaller sprints, and each sprint can add some capabilities. Some sprints can change the interface a little bit. Some don't. But it's continuous, and I think it takes some time to get used to that because all of a sudden you don't have a long-term planning process, and you also cannot implement gates of that kind. You need to have a more continuous approach to that, and we found that the best way to overcome some of these challenges is through visibility. If the right people have can see how it's working, both on the staging or development side, but also on the runtime side, as it hits production, because the difference between staging and production is very, very close when you do CI/CD. It can be like an hour before in staging, and then the next hour in production. So that level of visibility makes a difference. I think that in many organizations there's a huge challenge of not being able to see how things run as a developer. And that creates a lot of problems because if you don't see your piece of code all the way through from the development to the actual operations, you might miss some security aspects, you might miss operational aspects. So to me it boils to visibility and having the team own it from the beginning to the end.
Can I throw one more thought in there too? While you were talking, I thought, this is a really good opportunity too. If we do have these shared project groups and whatnot, it's the skill gap is also an issue kind of on the security side, and maybe on both sides, right? And if we can get the teams to work closer together to provide a shared deliverable. They can also help train each other, right? Because in incident response, if something is going on with one of our APIs, whether it's ours or a third party, we need to pull in development resources because we just don't have that expertise on staff right now. Well, the more they pair, the more we learn, and the more that the application guys learn as well. And we can kind of say, oh, this is the kind of stuff we look for. And it may be a little less formal, but I think it's a really great opportunity there as well.
It is. We saw that all the time. We're working with different security teams. I think that exactly as you said, there's a knowledge gap, and it's on both sides. I think the developers don't necessarily think about the security aspects of it, and the security team naturally knows the specific APIs and the specific code less than the developers because they didn't develop it. Working together makes all the difference, for sure.
So again, I tap into my program manager mind here, and I always say to myself that the list always grows, never shortens, right? There's always something else added to the stack of things to work on. And as you were both talking, I'm just thinking, well, this isn't just the application. And Giora, you kind of touched on a little bit when you said even if this is hosted in a data center that you're exposing through an interface externally to a partner, that's SaaS to them, even if it's data center to you on-prem. What I'm thinking about is just, it's no longer just spin up a Windows machine or spin up a Linux machine in the data center and build this app to run there with a directory and a database and whatever else you're going to pull in. It's pick your platform of choice, pick your SaaS and PaaS and IaaS and all your open source elements to give you two-factor auth, and or maybe that's not open source, but all these things, right, come together And your teams, the people responsible for ensuring security as the app's built, ensuring security as it's running, and responding to things when they break, as you well put, Kristy, is super complicated. So to me, that list just never ending grows to new skills coming our way. How do you get a handle on that? Because it's very easy to become the Department of No again. Well, no, you can't run on that platform. Just it's not going to happen because we don't have the team to support it. So how do we get around that?
Yeah, it's definitely a real struggle. You have to, again, we have to be creative, right? We don't have all the people we need. We don't have all the time we need. And you kind of have to prioritize based on risk and based on I'm going back to the strategy. Why are we here? What are we trying to work for? And I'm infamous for this because I get a wild hair and I'm like, I'm going to switch out this big thing, but it's a lot of money. It's a lot of resources. Okay, well, calm down. It's like, let's figure out, where does this fit in the overall picture of things? You're not the only person on the planet. We got to fit this in the budget. We've got to figure out where we are from a risk perspective and where does this make sense? And can we do it? And then can we support it? Because the last thing you want to do is get yet another tool or another, big effort that could be multi-years in implementation that isn't going to be supported. So you really need to take a step back, look at the higher level view, and then figure out, okay, how can we make this work? And I try to approach that instead of ever saying no, because it's like, all right, well, let's see if this even makes sense. And let's look at the broader picture, because to your point, you're not just, it's just not my team trying to implement this. There's a bunch of people in there. Can we sustain the new knowledge that we're going to have to understand to be able to sustain that? And how do we best understand the security implications, right? APIs are I'm going to just throw them out there because they're everywhere. We have to use them for, again, commercial and in-house built tools. And how do we really know where we're getting our data from holistically, right? It's a challenge. Sometimes tools can help us. I'm not sure that an API gateway is a solution anymore, but I think maybe a mix of some things might be able to help get us there. So it's not an easy answer, and it's kind of one of those things you just have to continuous improvement, continuous learning. It's all trying to just keep on top of what your ecosystem looks like.
I wanted to add on your risk assessment perspective. I think it's probably the only way that makes sense in the end of the day, because there are so many moving parts, and we need to make sure that in the end of the day we're actually making a difference, and the business is more secure or less prone to attacks than the day before, right? So I think the one of the advantages of applications and APIs is that they're much more transparent on where they touch the business compared to infrastructure. Because when we protect infrastructure, we have network, we have all sorts of devices in the network. It's a little bit indirect, compared to the actual business value, where the business data are. You can still do the same analysis, but it's a little bit indirect. While on the application side and APIs, it's very clear how each application is related to the business and what type of data it has, especially the ones that are developed in-house. I mean, it's very, very clear because it's really part of the core business. And I think the advantage, or maybe the benefit of focusing on application security that way, is that you can actually you can do the risk analysis very well, because you actually know exactly what the application is used for, what is the meaning of the data, what happens if the data is accessed in the wrong way, and using that analysis you can focus on what makes the difference, rather than boiling the ocean. So we've seen that approach working very, very well for different organizations, and that's kind of the way to start. So definitely like the risk management approach.
Now I'm going to nerd out on risk management, because I love risk management. I don't know if that's sad or not, but it is the starting point for a lot of this, right? And of course, that big block has a bunch of things where you have to start somewhere within there. Maybe what are we trying to accomplish, and how are we doing it, and what are the assets and data used to do it, and who's going to make it happen? How do you get, or how have you seen organizations translate this idea of risk management into something that can be discussed and defined and measured, specifically around AppSec? Obviously, we're talking.
So I have a good example, or maybe a good framework that we saw, working for practitioners. So I think when it comes to assessing the risk of applications, I think the first question to ask is what applications do I expose to the outside? Typically, the ones that you expose to the outside are the most risky, naturally, because you expose the data to the outside. And typically, from a business perspective, what are these applications, even if you don't know the exact names of all the interfaces and the technical terms of each application, you know what it is. I mean, if it's a patient portal or or an open banking interface, or whatever industry you are, so it's pretty clear to list them. Typically, not such a long list. I mean, typically less than 10 items. In high level, of course, they can break down into more specific ones. Then the next question is typically, who is the user? Is it an end customer, a partner, an internal user? Because understanding the user also enables to understand what can go wrong. Then, of course, the next question is what can go wrong? Is it a compromised user, compromised partner, malicious user that stole the partner's credentials, or misimplementation? That can also happen. And then lastly, it's really all about what is the implication? Is there a compliance implication? Is there PII loss or financial loss? Whatever type of data is held in the system. So using that framework, we found that it's relatively easy to kind of start from the high level. Really start from less than 10 items that kind of represent your big things that you need to protect. And then you can break it down. I mean, you can take each one and break it down to sub-services or even microservices.
I love the simple framework. I applaud simple. I think the problem operationally is getting that champion, because a lot of times you'll have a formal risk organization, but they may be focused maybe not in this level of weeds. So you have to get the support to make sure that you carry that framework through, and that is bought off by the business, right? I think back to your question too, Sean, in there's a lot of numbers that you can work in that framework to measure, to kind of say, okay, well, if this application gets breached, that could potentially expose, this million records, whatever it is, of this type of data. Here's all the potential fines. Here's all the regulatory, issues we're going to have, all that kind of thing. I think you can very easily quantify that just from a potential impact perspective, and that really puts things in perspective very quickly.
I think one of the opportunities in application security in general is that it really speaks the business language compared to infrastructure. So I find that it's easier to explain to the executives, what's the implication of something, in an application, because they know what that application means from a business perspective, rather than an infrastructure component that is a little bit less direct.
Totally agree. Yeah.
And it's that mapping that's always fun to figure out. And so we're coming up here on a bit of time. I think we're going to wrap here in a second, but maybe some thoughts from each of you on the process itself. I don't know if you have any, I hate to call them silver bullets, but tips or tricks or something where if you just do this, change this process to here, or add this to your stand-up meeting, or use an API to connect this and this thing together, so you're not actually trying to strangle an engineer by walking over to the desk. You just put it in their Giora bucket, right? with the information. What are some things you can guide people with, or provide some advice that says these simple things can make a big difference in how you operate?
You want to go first?
Happy to. I think maybe two tips from my side. I think there's naturally the left side and the right side, and left side is more kind of starting from the code, from the development process, and that's important. And there's the right side of monitoring what's actually in production, and it's not either or. You actually need both, and I think it's important to start, even taking baby steps, but taking it in both sides, because I mean, even if you're the most advanced on the left side, you will still not be able to see what's actually going on in production. And you need to have these two capabilities together. And the second tip that sounds kind of simple, but is actually not simple, but you can definitely take the first steps. I mean, every organization can take the first steps. I think that the basic thing that is missing to most organizations that we noticed is the basic visibility, being able to see these actual web calls or API calls, and refer to them as something, even without understanding everything. Just having that inventory of APIs and being able to see the API calls. So this is something that is actually a problem both on the developer and the security side. If you solve that, and there are different ways to solve it, that creates a mutual language that you can use to to solve things, to talk about specific interfaces and so on.
Nice.
Couldn't agree more. The only thing I would add on top of that is also sounds simple, but it's really hard to do, is communication. Making sure that we're not so focused on getting that thing implemented that we talk to people and say, hey, I'm thinking about this and interfacing here and doing this. I think that would make a huge difference, because if the security side's aware of what's going on, we can help better guide instead of come back later and go, uh-oh, this thing's on fire. Now I got to go unpack what's really going on there.
Yeah, excellent points from both of you. And I really like when you said that it's both sides, and Kristy, you mentioned at the very beginning as well. When, at least for me, even when I put this topic together, AppSec, I immediately went to the left. What are we building? How do we ensure it's secure? And very easy to forget that it does go into production, right? And it may have a problem. It may break. And I actually have a panel coming up in a couple months on incident handling and response. And I think even that conversation needs to change. We're not going to have that today, but that conversation needs to change, because it's not just a system and users and some endpoint stuff we're monitoring, right? And so when we bring all these apps together, we have to monitor them. But what are we monitoring for? Yes, those things, the user activity and the transactions, but there could be things in there that we're not even paying attention to. Certainly bots have a big role in manipulating, well, maybe not mimicking human behavior to do things, but there's a lot of fraud. Who's looking for fraud? How do they know what to look for fraud? Is that security or not? So there's just so much in this space. And I'm always in awe of folks like you who get your hands dirty in this stuff every day, because I can think about it, but then I can go to sleep at night. not having to worry about it. No, but this is a great conversation. I don't know, any final thoughts from you, Kristy, and then you, Giora, as we wrap?
No, now I know why I don't sleep at night, though.
There you go. It's the fraud in the apps. Giora, anything?
I think great conversations, and I think that kind of getting down to the foundational business process and understanding the business process is really the key. And I think the beauty of it is that anybody can do that. I mean, it doesn't require deep technical knowledge to understand the business process. I mean, that's something that we should all be able to do. But starting there is really is really useful. And I always like these discussions of understanding the business process, and then from that we we understand, all the different challenges.
Yeah, I'm going to make a plug for program managers, business-oriented program managers who have that view across all the stuff can really help. That's my take anyway. Anyway, thank you both for a great conversation, packed a lot into the short amount of time. It's a pleasure having you on. Hopefully you'll join again. Maybe the IR one. I don't know. Kristy, maybe you want to come back for that one. For those listening, there'll be notes in the show for things that Kristy and Giora want to share. Maybe some resources. I know I mentioned OWASP, and I think Kristy mentioned OWASP. Maybe we'll just link to the top 10 for that, just for folks to reference. And of course, stay tuned for more conversations here on Redefining Security as we hopefully help teams figure out a way to operationalize all this stuff, not just look at it sitting on the shelf. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Asgardia by WSO2 is a developer-focused identity and access management solution. Offered as Identity as a Service, or IDaaS, Asgardia by WSO2 creates seamless login experiences to your apps in minutes.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Security podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.